Okay. What's up, sons? It's BlindRod with Simatech once again, and guess what? We finally have another leak, but this one from the flagship i9. Yeah, not i7, i9 on the consumer platform, which is, you know, never had an i9 before, the 9900K from Intel. Yesterday, we took a look at the 9700K gaming benchmark leaks that was paired with the GTX 1070. But fear not, today we have a GTX 1080 Ti, and the benchmark is going to be Time Spy. Okay, so if you're not familiar yet, Intel is releasing a new platform. It's basically a refresh. It's going to have the new Z390 chipset, and it's going to support the 9900K, which is an i9 processor that has 8 cores, 16 threads, that clocks to up to 5 gigahertz on a single thread, while going up to about 4.8 on 2 to 4 threads, or 4.7 on 4 to 6 threads. So it's a little convoluted. That's also going to be with, of course, NCE or multi-core enhancement enabled, which I highly advise against, because if you enable that, at least for this entire past line of Kaby Lake, Skylake, and all that, Coffee Lake, what I've noticed is NCE can actually push way too much voltage to your CPU and cause it to spike up to 100 degrees, and it doesn't really regulate itself very well. So be very, very careful, make sure you have enough cooling. That being said, it does look like it's enabled for this benchmark, and they came back after, of course, the leaks yesterday. It appears that the Ryzen 7 2700X was in some cases beating the i7 9700K, which is an 8-core non-hyper-threaded part. And I think that we're almost seeing a controlled leak by Intel here to show that they do have the fastest gaming CPUs out, because this one, this latest one, is beating the 2700X, albeit by not that much. Taking a look here, you'll see that at stock, well, stock with multi-core enhancement turned on, I can tell here just by taking a look at the clock speeds. It shows that it's boosting to 4.8 gigahertz, which would be with multi-core enhancement on, and that is supposedly on all cores from the best I can tell. It's running with the GTX 1080 Ti, and Slick McFavorite ran the first test with a total overall score of 10,747, and on the CPU itself scoring 11,459, and on the CPU test gaining 38.5 frames per second. What gets really interesting here is, yes, it does beat the 2700X, but there was another run where somebody overclocked it to 5 gigahertz. And here they actually scored lower than the run at 4.8 gigahertz. There's a couple things that could be going on here. First of all, if you take a look up at the top, you'll notice that the clock speed on the 1080 Ti for the better run at 4.8 gigahertz was at 2050 megahertz, while on the 5 gigahertz run was only at 1936. There's a couple other things could be a little bit more dubious going on here, and if it is CPU related, you're going to be worrying about A, thermals, or B, not enough voltage. Those go hand in hand. Basically, not enough voltage to keep the CPU at 5 gigahertz the entire time, or of course so much voltage that it is overheating and thermal throttling. It's hard to say what the case is here. I do know just from taking a look at some of the other tests from the 9700K that it does run hot, and things like a single 120 millimeter all-in-one cooling solution isn't going to be enough to cool these high-end Intel consumer grade parts. Both of them do still beat out, of course, the Ryzen 7 2700X, which yesterday when we showed in the video was beating the 9700K, and it beats it by about, well, overall score only about 30 points. However, when you take a look at the CPU individual score, it beats it by a little bit more. What I do see going on a little funky as far as the score on the 2700X they showed here, the GPU's clocked at 2076. So that will account for, of course, the overall score being bumped up that high, as the actual CPU score was only 10,285 compared to the 11,459, which presumably is multi-core enhancement, which should be out of the box, theoretically. but not advised, like I mentioned earlier. And it does lose out by about 2 to 4 frames per second depending on which benchmark we're comparing it to. Overall, should you be excited for the 9900K? Yes, I don't see why you wouldn't be excited for a new CPU. That's just silly. That's just silly. The real question is it really going to be worth it at the high price point? I think it came out, it's supposed to be something like $520 US, which is crazy and definitely puts it out of the range of the 2700X price-wise. So I'm really thinking that the most appealing CPU out of this lineup is going to be that 9700K, which does appear to be doing really, really well in gaming and is beating out everything for the most part except for the synthetic benchmarks where, you know, it is losing out to the red team. But if you're comparing those both together, the story still remains the same for Intel versus AMD. If you're purely about gaming and getting the most frames per second out of your system, you're gonna go with an Intel CPU at this point. But if you're looking at more productivity and overall functionality, you're probably going to want to go with a Ryzen system, even if you're doing some gaming on the side, because Ryzen has come a long dang way from where they started out with the first gen in gaming. And now that more and more games are starting to support multi-threading, which is just awesome, and we see it coming across with things like Total War Warhammer, we see it coming across with even Far Cry 5 to a certain extent, and Rise of the Tomb Raider as well, always been like that to a certain extent. It's been optimized more and more for, of course, multi-threading. But as we see that, we are seeing the Ryzen CPUs catch up, which is why I think you see Intel coming out with a solution that adds even more cores and even more threads to their consumer lineup. But the conclusion still remains the same. And are you willing to pay the extra amount for just that little bit of extra performance in your games? That's up to you. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe down below. We'll be coming at you guys with more videos this week. I have lots of stuff. Oh, one thing in here. See you next Tuesday.